My name is Vanessa, and for 15 years, my parents systematically erased me from our family narrative, cropping me from photos, excluding me from reunions, even removing my childhood trophies from display cabinets. All while my sister Elise was elevated, celebrated, featured prominently on their social media. But what if I told you that when my company's valuation hit $1 billion and my face appeared on the cover of Forbes, those same parents suddenly remembered they had 2 daughters? That the mother who once told me I was too ambitious for a girl now claims she always believed in me? That the sister who plagiarized my college thesis now wants to partner on a book about sisterly success? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The day I realized I would never be enough for my family wasn't dramatic. There was no screaming confrontation, no doors slammed in anger. It was a quiet Sunday afternoon, the kind where sunlight filters through curtains and dust motes dance in golden beams. I was visiting my parents' home for the first time, in months, having finally gathered the courage after our last tense holiday together. I'd brought good news. My tech startup had secured its first serious funding round after 2 years of 16-hour days, ramen dinners, and maxed-out credit cards. $2 million from investors who believed in my vision for revolutionizing renewable energy distribution. Not life-changing money, but validation that I wasn't crazy for dropping out of my PhD program to pursue this dream. The living room looked different somehow, brighter, freshly painted in a soft cream instead of the faded yellow I remembered. New furniture, too, sleek and modern, replacing the worn floral couch where I'd spent countless childhood hours reading, while my sister practiced dance routines for my parents' enthusiastic applause. "We've been redecorating," my mother explained, noticing my wandering gaze. "Your father finally got that promotion, so we decided to treat ourselves." "It looks great," I offered, searching for the family photos that had always cluttered the mantelpiece. Those mismatched frames chronicling birthdays, graduations, vacations, the visual history of our family. They were there, but different. Organized now in matching silver frames, arranged in perfect symmetry. I stepped closer, expecting to see the familiar progression of my awkward adolescence alongside Elise's more photogenic journey through the same years. But I wasn't there. Photo after photo showed my sister, my parents, sometimes extended family, smiling. At holidays, posing at Elise's college graduation, gathered at my cousin's wedding. In some pictures, the composition seemed oddly unbalanced, with peculiar empty spaces where I should have been standing. "These are beautiful frames," I said finally, my voice sounding strange to my own ears. "When did you get them?" "Oh, your sister helped us organize everything last month," my mother replied, straightening an already perfectly aligned frame. "She said the old arrangement looked cluttered. This is much more cohesive." Cohesive. The word hung in the air between us. What she meant was curated, edited, revised to tell a specific story about our family, one where I was an afterthought, if thought of at all. I turned away from the mantel, noticing now what else had changed. The built-in bookshelves where my academic awards had once stood beside Elise's dance trophies, now displayed only her achievements. The wall where both our graduation photos had hung showed only her master's degree ceremony. Even the refrigerator, once plastered with both our childish artwork, now showcased only yellowing crayon drawings signed with her name. It was as if they had methodically, deliberately erased evidence of my existence while I'd been away building my company. "I brought wine," I said, retreating to the kitchen where my tote bag waited. "To celebrate my funding news." My father looked up from his newspaper, eyes briefly meeting mine before sliding away. "What funding news?" The casual dismissal in his tone was familiar, the same inflection he'd used when I'd excitedly shown him my perfect SAT scores, when I'd been accepted to MIT on full scholarship, when I'd published my first academic paper as an undergraduate. Always that same vague acknowledgement, followed by a swift change of subject. "My company," I said, pulling out the bottle with hands I forced to remain steady. "We closed our seed round, $2 million in funding." "That little project?" "Of yours?" my mother asked, arranging cheese on a platter. "That's nice, dear. Is that why you've been too busy to visit? Or even call?" Before I could answer, the front door burst open and Elise swept in, trailing designer shopping bags and the scent of expensive perfume. At 28, just 2 years younger than me, my sister had mastered the art of making entrances. "Mom! Dad! You won't believe what happened," she announced, dropping her bags to embrace our parents. "Robert from the network called. They want me to host 3 segments next week. National exposure." My sister, with her communications degree and carefully cultivated social media presence, had recently landed a job as a local morning show correspondent. This was apparently a significant development in her career trajectory. The transformation in my parents was immediate and complete. My father set aside his newspaper. My mother abandoned her cheese platter, and both converged on Elise with expressions of undisguised pride. "That's wonderful, sweetheart. We always knew you had star quality. This calls for a celebration." My mother turned to me as if suddenly remembering my presence. "Vanessa, isn't your sister's news wonderful? All those childhood pageants and speech competitions paying off." I forced a smile. "Congratulations, Elise. That's really great." "Thanks, V," my sister replied, using the childhood nickname I'd always hated. Her gaze fell to the wine bottle in my hand. "Are we celebrating something?" "Vanessa was just telling us about some funding for her computer thing," my father said vaguely, waving a dismissive hand. $2 million, I clarified, a strange calm settling over me. "For my renewable energy distribution platform, the one I've been building for 2 years. "Oh, right," Elise said, her expression flickering briefly with something unreadable. "Congrats. Hey, did I tell you guys the segment might include an interview with Senator Mitchell? His press secretary hinted they're interested." And just like that, the moment was gone. My news, the culmination of years of work, of sacrifice, of believing in myself when no one else would, evaporated like morning mist under the bright sun of Elise's more comprehensible achievement. We moved to the dining room, where my mother had prepared Elise's favorite meal. The conversation swirled around television ratings, potential outfits for on-camera appearances, and speculation about future opportunities. No one asked about my company, what it did, why investors believed in it, what the funding meant for our growth. It was as if I hadn't spoken at all. I sat there, fork moving mechanically between plate and mouth, and finally understood. This wasn't new. This wasn't a recent development or a passing phase. This was simply the clearest manifestation of a truth that had always existed. I did not fit the narrative my family had constructed about themselves. My academic achievements, my entrepreneurial drive, my preference for solving complex problems, over seeking spotlight. These were anomalies they couldn't integrate into their understanding of who we were as a family. So rather than expand their narrative, they had simply edited me out. The revelation didn't hurt as much as I expected. Instead, it brought clarity, like stepping back from a painting I'd been examining too closely and finally seeing the complete image. This wasn't about my worth, it was about their limitations. After dinner, while Elise commanded the living room with animated stories about celebrities she'd interviewed, I slipped outside to the backyard. The old oak tree still stood at the property's edge, its massive trunk and spreading branches unchanged, since I'd climbed it as a child. Unlike the house's interior, nature hadn't been redecorated or curated. It simply was. I sat on the wooden swing my father had hung when we were small, letting my feet drag through the grass as I gently rocked back and forth. My phone buzzed with a message from Aiden, my CTO and closest friend. "How's it going with the family? Did you tell them the news?" I typed back, "They're rewriting history. I'm not in it." His response came quickly. "Then write your own damn history. Make it so significant they can't ignore it." I looked up at the darkening sky, at stars emerging one by one above me. Aiden was right. I couldn't change my family's narrative, but I could create my own. One so compelling, so undeniable, that it would exist independent of their recognition or approval. I pushed off the ground, sending the swing higher. For the first time that day, I smiled genuinely. This visit had given me something valuable after all: freedom. Freedom from seeking validation where it would never be given. Freedom to define success on my own terms. When I left an hour later, I didn't announce my departure or make promises about visiting again soon. I simply walked to my car, started the engine, and drove toward the future I was building for myself. One where being cropped out of family photos would be the least interesting thing about me. My relationship with ambition began long before I understood what the word meant. It started with puzzles. The more pieces, the better. While other 5-year-olds abandoned half-finished projects at the first sign of frustration, I would sit, for hours, methodically testing each piece until the complete image emerged. My grandfather Joseph was the first to notice this quality in me. "That girl's got grit," he would tell my parents, his weathered hand resting on my shoulder. "She doesn't quit until she solves the problem." Grandpa Joseph had built his construction company from nothing after returning from Vietnam with shrapnel in his leg and determination in his heart. He'd started with small residential repairs and eventually grew to handle major commercial projects across 3 states. He understood the value of persistence in a way my parents never seemed to grasp. Our Sunday visits to his lakeside home were sacred to me. While Elise practiced dance routines on his sprawling lawn for my parents' admiration, I would slip into his cluttered home office where blueprints and project plans covered every surface. He taught me to read architectural drawings before I could read chapter books, explaining load-bearing walls and electrical systems with the same patience he applied to everything. "See how everything connects, Vanessa?" he would say, tracing the lines with a calloused finger. "That's the secret. Understanding the system, not just the parts." When I was 8, he gave me my first calculator and taught me to estimate material costs. By 10, I was helping him draft simple designs on his computer. These were the hours that shaped me. Quiet afternoons spent learning how things worked, how to build something lasting. "Your grandfather is filling her head with all that technical nonsense," I overheard my mother telling my father one evening after a Sunday visit. "She's already awkward enough with the other girls. How will she ever make friends if all she talks about is architecture and math?" My father's response was a non-committal grunt, the sound I'd come to associate with conversations about me. For Elise, he had animated discussions about her performances and social activities. For me, he had grunts and distracted nods. The pattern was established early. Elise was the performer, the social butterfly who reflected the image my parents wanted to project to the world. I was the puzzle solver, the quiet observer who asked uncomfortable questions and preferred books to parties. In a family that valued appearance and social standing above all, I was an anomaly they never quite knew how to showcase. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. It wasn't that they were cruel, they provided equally for both of us materially. We both attended good schools, had nice clothes, received orthodontic work when needed. But emotional investment was another matter entirely. That was distributed according to how closely we aligned with their vision of success. My middle school years brought academic achievements that my parents acknowledged with polite disinterest. Perfect scores on standardized tests were met with, That's nice, dear. While Elise's selection for the lead in the school play prompted celebration dinners and framed programs displayed prominently on the piano, high school brought more of the same. I gravitated toward STEM subjects, joining the robotics team and computer club. When our robotics team won the state championship and qualified for nationals, my parents couldn't attend due to a schedule conflict with Elise's regional dance competition. You understand, don't you, Vanessa? My mother had asked, not really expecting an answer. Elise needs us there for moral support. Your thing is more technical. You'll be fine without us. I was fine without them. Our faculty advisor, Dr. Chen, stepped in as my unofficial cheerleader, her enthusiastic support filling the void left by my parents' absence. When I received my acceptance letter to MIT with a full scholarship, it was Dr. Chen who took me to dinner to celebrate, who cried proud tears as if I were her own daughter. You're going to change the world someday, Vanessa, she told me, raising her glass of sparkling cider in a toast. Not because you're trying to impress anyone, but because you see problems others don't even recognize yet. My parents' response to my MIT acceptance was predictably subdued. Massachusetts is so far away, my mother worried, and so expensive. She got a full ride, my father pointed out, briefly looking up from his laptop. Still, all those flight costs for holidays, she countered. And it's such a technical school. Wouldn't she be happier somewhere more balanced? By balanced, she meant somewhere I might transform into a different person, someone more like Elise, who was attending the state university's communications program and already landing minor local modeling jobs that my mother proudly shared with her social circle. The gulf between us widened during my college years. While I immersed myself in complex engineering problems and energy systems, developing the foundation for what would eventually become my company, my family's understanding of my work remained superficial at best. Vanessa does something with computers became my mother's standard explanation when friends or relatives asked about me. The fact that I was developing breakthrough approaches to renewable energy distribution, approaches that could potentially transform how rural communities accessed clean power, was reduced to something with computers. Grandpa Joseph was different. Though his health was failing, he insisted I explain my research during holiday visits, his eyes brightening with understanding as I outlined my ideas. You're seeing the whole system, he would say, nodding with satisfaction. Not just the parts everyone else focuses on. During my junior year at MIT, he was diagnosed with aggressive pancreatic cancer. I took a semester off to help care for him, setting up a workstation in his home where I could continue my research while managing his medications and keeping him company. In those final months, as his body weakened but his mind remained sharp, we had conversations that would shape the rest of my life. He spoke of regrets, business opportunities not taken out of fear, relationships damaged by pride, time wasted on impressing people whose opinions ultimately didn't matter. Your grandmother used to tell me I was too ambitious, he confided, one evening as we watched the sunset from his porch. Said I was chasing dollars instead of happiness. Took me years to make her understand I wasn't chasing money at all. I was chasing problems worth solving. He squeezed my hand with surprising strength. You're the same way, Vanessa. You don't care about the spotlight. You care about the solution. 2 weeks before he died, he called his lawyer to the house and made changes to his will. I didn't know the details until after the funeral, when the attorney handed me an envelope containing the deed to Grandpa Joseph's lake house and documents establishing a trust fund of $500,000. Seed money, the note explained, for the company he knew I would someday build. She sees systems others don't, he'd written in shaky handwriting. Give her the foundation to build something that lasts. My parents were stunned by this development. The lake house had been our family's gathering place for decades. They had assumed it would be sold or left to them. The money was even more shocking. None of us had realized my grandfather had accumulated such wealth. He should have divided it equally, my mother said repeatedly in the days following the reading of the will. It's not right to favor one grandchild over another. The fact that Elise had visited our grandfather exactly twice during his illness, while I had put my education on hold to care for him, didn't seem relevant to her sense of fairness. In her view, family resources should be distributed equally regardless of contribution or connection. I offered to share the inheritance with Elise, but my sister surprised me with her response. "Keep it," she said, uncharacteristically serious. "Grandpa gave it to you because he believed in what you're trying to build. I wouldn't know what to do with it anyway." It was perhaps the most genuine moment we'd shared as adults, a brief acknowledgement that we were fundamentally different, people with different paths. For a moment, I glimpsed the person my sister might have been if our parents hadn't constantly positioned us as competitors in a zero-sum game where only one daughter could truly be valued. When I returned to MIT the following semester, I did, so with a clearer sense of purpose. My grandfather's belief in me, tangibly expressed through his final gift, became the foundation upon which I would build not just a company, but an identity independent of my family's narrow definition of success. I launched myself into my studies with renewed focus, expanding my research into practical applications that could transform rural energy distribution. By graduation, I had a working prototype, 3 pending patents, and the attention of several professors who saw the potential in my approach. "You could publish this research and secure a prestigious academic position," my faculty advisor suggested. "With your mind, a research career would be the natural path." But I remembered my grandfather's words about problems worth solving, about building something that lasts. Academic papers would advance knowledge incrementally, but I wanted to create tangible change in how real communities accessed clean energy. So instead of pursuing a safe academic career, I took a risk. I used my grandfather's seed money to found Electrogrid, a company dedicated to developing modular, scalable, renewable energy solutions for communities overlooked by traditional utility companies. My parents' response to this decision was predictably discouraging. "A startup?" my father questioned during a rare phone call. "Vanessa, do you have any idea how many of those fail in the first year? Why not get a stable position with an established company first?" "This isn't just any startup, Dad," I tried to explain. "We're developing technology that could bring affordable clean energy to communities that have been ignored by the major utilities." "That sounds very idealistic," my mother chimed in from the extension. "Maybe too ambitious for a young woman just starting out? No one expects you to solve the world's energy problems right away." That phrase, "too ambitious for a young woman," lodged in my chest like a splinter. It crystallized everything about their perception of me, about the limited scope of achievement they believed appropriate for their less favored daughter. I ended the call shortly after, sitting alone in the small apartment that doubled as Electrogrid's first office, surrounded by prototypes and circuit boards. On my desk sat a framed photo of my grandfather and me, taken during my childhood as we reviewed blueprints together. "Too ambitious," I repeated to the empty room, a smile slowly forming. "We'll see about that." I taped a note above my workspace, words that would become my mantra during the difficult early days of building my company. Not too ambitious, just ambitious enough. The launch event for Electrogrid was modest by Silicon Valley standards. No champagne fountains or celebrity appearances, just 40 chairs arranged in a rented community center space, a simple podium, and a working prototype of our first microgrid system. What we lacked in glitz, we made up for in substance. Local reporters from tech publications lined the back wall. 2 potential investors sat in the front row, alongside professors from MIT's Energy Initiative who had mentored me. Representatives from 3 rural communities that had agreed to pilot our technology were scattered throughout the audience. The room hummed with the particular energy that accompanies ideas on the verge of becoming reality. I hadn't invited my family. After our last conversation about my too ambitious venture, it seemed pointless to subject myself to their underwhelming response on a day when I needed to project absolute confidence. But as I arranged handouts on the welcome table, a familiar voice cut through the pre-event chatter. "There she is, my little sister, the tech genius." Elise swept into the room like a gust of wind, drawing every eye with her practiced entrance. Behind her trailed my parents, looking uncomfortable and out of place among the engineers and energy specialists. My father clutched a bouquet of flowers that appeared to have been hastily purchased at a supermarket. "We thought we'd surprise you," my mother explained, air kissing near my cheek. "Elise has an interview in Boston tomorrow, so we made a family trip of it." "Her first national segment," my father added proudly. "They're profiling up-and-coming media personalities under 30. I forced a smile, even as I felt my carefully constructed professional persona wobbling. "That's great. I'm surprised to see you all here." "We couldn't miss your big debut," Elise said, glancing around the modest venue with barely concealed disappointment. "Though I expected something a bit more impressive, given all the work you've been doing." Before I could respond, Aiden appeared at my side, his lanky frame and perpetually disheveled appearance a stark contrast to my sister's polished perfection. As my CTO and earliest believer in electrogrid, he had developed a finely tuned radar for situations that might derail me. "You must be Vanessa's family," he said, extending his hand. "I'm Aiden Chen, Chief Technology Officer. We're about to begin, and I need to steal our CEO for final preparations." Without waiting for their response, he steered me toward the preparation room, closing the door behind us. "What are they doing here?" he asked, his usual laid-back demeanor replaced with protective concern. I shook my head, trying to calm my suddenly racing heart. "Elise has a TV thing tomorrow. They decided to make a family event of it and stop by my little project while they're in town." "Your little project that just secured $2 million in seed funding and has 3 communities signed up for pilot implementation," Aiden corrected, straightening my collar with brotherly affection. "Don't let them diminish this, Vanessa. Today isn't about them." He was right, of course. I took a deep breath, mentally reviewing the presentation I'd rehearsed dozens of times. This moment represented 2 years of 18-hour days, of ramen, dinners and maxed-out credit cards, of believing in my vision when conventional wisdom said it couldn't be done. I wouldn't let my family's presence, or their inevitable underwhelming response, detract from what we had accomplished. 10 minutes until showtime," Aiden reminded me. "I'll make sure they're seated, preferably not in your direct line of sight." The presentation itself went better than I could have hoped. I spoke about the 2 billion people worldwide without reliable electricity, about how conventional power grids failed rural communities, about electrogrid's revolutionary approach to modular, scalable, renewable energy. I demonstrated our prototype, showing how a single unit could power a small medical clinic or school, and how multiple units could be linked to serve an entire community. The audience was engaged, asking thoughtful questions about implementation, timelines, scalability challenges, and potential regulatory hurdles. When I announced that 3 rural communities in New Mexico would begin piloting our technology the following month, genuine applause filled the room. Afterward, as attendees clustered around the prototype for a closer look, I found myself cornered by my family near the refreshment table. "Well, that was certainly technical," my mother offered, sipping lukewarm coffee from a paper cup. "I didn't understand most of it, but you seemed very prepared." "Thanks," I replied, watching from the corner of my eye as one of our potential investors engaged animatedly with Aiden across the room. "It's complex technology, but the impact is simple: bringing affordable clean energy to communities that have been left behind." "Always the idealist," my father commented, checking his watch. Though I'm not sure there's much money in serving poor rural areas. Wouldn't major energy companies already be doing this if it were profitable? That's exactly the point, Dad, I explained, trying to keep frustration from my voice. They've ignored these communities because traditional approaches aren't cost-effective for dispersed populations. Our technology changes the equation. Before he could respond, Elise interjected. Speaking of media, have you thought about how you're presenting all this? I mean, the technology sounds impressive, but your delivery is so academic. You should let me help you with your public speaking. Add some personality, some flair. I bit back a sharp response, remembering we were still surrounded by potential partners and investors. Electrogrid isn't about personality or flair. It's about solving a critical infrastructure problem affecting billions of people. Still, Elise persisted, no one will care about your solution if you can't make them care about you first. That's just basic media psychology. You should let me coach you before your next presentation. A familiar voice interrupted our conversation. Excuse me, are you Vanessa's family? We turned to find Dr. Sandra Wilson, director of the MIT Energy Initiative and one of my most influential mentors, regarding us with curiosity. Yes, my mother answered, automatically straightening her posture. I'm Patricia Morgan, Vanessa's mother. This is her father, Thomas, and her sister, Elise. Dr. Wilson's gaze swept over them before returning to me with unmistakable pride. You've raised an extraordinary young woman. Vanessa's approach to distributed energy systems is genuinely revolutionary. We've had doctoral candidates studying this problem for decades without the breakthrough she's achieved. My parents exchanged glances, clearly surprised by this assessment from someone whose authority they couldn't easily dismiss. Several of my colleagues are already incorporating her research into our graduate curriculum, Dr. Wilson continued. In fact, MIT's engineering department is considering her for our Young Alumni Achievement Award this year. I hadn't known about the award consideration, and warmth spread through my chest at this unexpected validation from my academic home. That's wonderful, my father responded, his tone shifting from dismissive to curious. We've always known Vanessa was academically gifted. It's far more than academic gift, Dr. Wilson corrected him gently but firmly. What your daughter has created has the potential to transform energy access for underserved populations globally. This isn't just a clever student project, it's a viable solution to one of our most pressing infrastructure challenges. She turned to me. The Johnson Foundation representatives want to speak with you. They're considering funding pilot implementations beyond the initial 3 communities. As I excused myself to speak with the potential funders, I caught a glimpse of my family's expressions, my father's puzzled reassessment, my mother's uncertain smile, and most surprisingly, a flash of something like genuine respect in Elise's eyes. The conversation with the Johnson Foundation representatives was productive, culminating in a tentative commitment to fund 5 additional pilot sites if the initial implementations proved successful. When I finally returned to look for my family, Aiden informed me they had left while I was engaged with the funders. Your mother said they needed to prepare for Elise's interview tomorrow, he explained, helping me pack up our demonstration materials. They asked me to tell you they'd see you at dinner tonight. I nodded, unsurprised by their early departure. Even with Dr. Wilson's glowing assessment, they had witnessed only a presentation, not tangible success. In their world, media appearances and social recognition trumped technical innovation every time. Elise's upcoming national TV segment would naturally take precedence over my company launch in their hierarchy of achievements. Later that evening, at an upscale restaurant chosen by my parents, I arrived to find them already seated with cocktails. Elise was showing them segment preparation notes on her tablet, walking through the questions she'd be asked and her planned responses. There you are, my mother greeted me. We were just reviewing Elise's interview strategy for tomorrow. The producer sent her the questions in advance, Such a good sign that they want her to shine. That's great, I replied, taking the remaining seat. The launch went really well after you left. The Johnson Foundation is interested in funding 5 additional pilot sites. Wonderful, dear, my father said absently, still looking at Elise's tablet. Is that a significant amount of funding? Potentially several $1,000,000, I answered, opening my menu. But more importantly, it means we can expand our impact much faster than projected. My mother nodded vaguely before turning. Back to Elise. Now, for the segment on your charity work, do you think you should mention the children's hospital visit or focus on the environmental cleanup? The environmental angle might tie in nicely with current trends. The familiar pattern reasserted itself, my achievement acknowledged with cursory interest before conversation snapped back to Elise like a stretched rubber band returning to its natural state. I should have expected it, yet Dr. Wilson's earlier recognition had briefly led me to hope for something different. As they debated the merits of various talking points for Elise's 3-minute segment, I felt a strange sense of detachment watching them. These people, my family by blood and upbringing, seemed increasingly like characters in a play I was observing rather than participating in. Their concerns, their values, their definition of success, all felt foreign to the person I had become. My phone vibrated with a text from Aiden. Wilson just emailed. MIT Energy Journal wants to feature Electra Grid in their cover story next month. This is huge, V. I smiled at the screen, a quiet sense of validation washing over me. My family might never fully understand or appreciate what I was building, but others, those who recognized the significance of the problem I was solving, were beginning to take notice. Something important? My father asked, noticing my expression. Just good news, I replied, tucking my phone away. MIT Energy Journal wants to feature Electra Grid as their cover story next month. For a brief moment, genuine interest flickered across my father's face. A cover story? That's significant exposure. Before the moment could develop, Elise interjected, "Speaking of media coverage, the network producer mentioned they might be interested in a series of segments, not just tomorrow's interview. That could lead to a regular contributor position." And just like that, the familiar gravitational pull reasserted itself, conversation orbiting back to Elise's prospects. But this time, I felt something different. Not the usual pang of disappointment, but a curious sense of freedom. Their validation, I realized, was no longer essential to my sense of achievement. I had built something real, something meaningful, something that stood on its own merits regardless of their acknowledgement. I excused myself to use the restroom, and standing alone before the mirror, I studied my reflection. The woman looking back at me wasn't the overlooked daughter seeking parental approval or the awkward counterpoint to her more socially adept sister. She was the founder and CEO of Electra Grid, innovator of distributed renewable energy systems, potential recipient of MIT's Young Alumni Achievement Award. Not too ambitious, I whispered to my reflection, a smile forming. Just ambitious enough. When I returned to the table, I did so with a newfound sense of detachment from their approval. I participated politely in the conversation, offered genuine congratulations for Elise's opportunities, but no longer felt the ache of invisibility that had been my constant companion at family gatherings. My validation would come from elsewhere, from communities gaining electricity for the first time, from investors recognizing the potential of our approach, from mentors like Dr. Wilson who understood the significance of what we were building. Perhaps someday my family would truly see me too, but I was no longer waiting for that recognition to begin my life. 3 months after our launch event, Electra Grid's first pilot installations in New Mexico were exceeding all performance projections. Our modular system was providing reliable power to a small medical clinic, an elementary school, and a community center in areas previously dependent on diesel generators or inconsistent grid connections. The data streaming back to our headquarters validated what I had believed all along: that decentralized renewable power could transform rural infrastructure more efficiently than traditional utility approaches. I was reviewing the latest performance metrics on a Tuesday morning when Maya, our operations director, appeared in my office doorway, clutching her tablet with an unusual expression, somewhere between concern and confusion. "You need to see this," she said, placing the tablet in front of me. It just went live on the Regional Energy Forum site. The screen displayed an opinion piece titled "The False Promise of Microgrid Solutions" by Thomas Westfield, Vice President of Operations at Consolidated Power. The article methodically attacked the entire premise of decentralized energy systems, using arguments that seemed eerily familiar because they were mine. Specifically, they were from my graduate thesis that had explored potential limitations of early microgrid technologies before proposing the innovations that now formed electrogrid's core intellectual property. "He's citing my own research to discredit our current technology," I said, scrolling through the article with increasing disbelief. "But he's selectively quoting from a paper I wrote 3 years ago, ignoring all the solutions we've developed since then." Maya nodded grimly. "Keep reading. It gets worse." Near the article's conclusion, Westfield revealed his company's plans to unveil their own revolutionary microgrid solution at the upcoming National Renewable Energy Conference, exactly 1 week before Electrogrid was scheduled to present our successful pilot data at the same event. "They're trying to scoop us," I said, the implications becoming clear. "They want to position themselves as the innovators and frame us as following their lead." "But how did they get your research?" Maya asked. "The technical specifications for our current systems aren't public yet." I leaned back in my chair, a sickening suspicion forming. "My thesis is publicly available through MIT's repository. But the specific improvements we've implemented since then, those are proprietary." I opened my laptop and pulled up our internal development timeline, comparing it with known industry events. Consolidated Power had shown no interest in microgrid technology until approximately 6 months ago, right after I had presented our preliminary designs at an MIT alumni event. An alumni event where Thomas Westfield's son, Eric, had been present as a recent graduate of MIT's business school. "I need to make a call," I told Maya, reaching for my phone. Dr. Wilson answered on the second ring. "Vanessa, I was just about to call you. Have you seen the Westfield article?" "Yes. And I have a question. Was Eric Westfield involved with the energy initiative while he was at the business school?" Her hesitation told me everything before she even spoke. "He wasn't officially affiliated with us, but he attended several joint events. Actually, he expressed particular interest in your work after your presentation last fall. He requested access to some of your early research notes." "And did he receive that access?" I asked, already knowing the answer. "He was an MIT graduate, student at the time, with his father's company listed as his post-graduation employer. There was no reason to deny his academic request," she explained, regret evident in her voice. "Vanessa, if Consolidated has misappropriated your intellectual property—" "They've been careful," I interrupted, scanning the article again. "They're using just enough of my published work to establish their expertise, while hinting at proprietary innovations that sound suspiciously like our current technology." After ending the call, I gathered our leadership team for an emergency meeting. As we discussed potential responses, a notification appeared on my phone, a LinkedIn message from Eric Westfield himself. "Saw your pilot projects in NM. Impressive start, but you must know small players can't compete with established utilities. Long term, Consolidated is always looking for promising talent to acquire. Coffee sometime?" The audacity was breathtaking. They'd studied my research, potentially appropriated our innovations, and now were positioning themselves to either crush us or absorb us. This wasn't just business competition. It felt personal, a calculated move to ensure I couldn't establish Electrogrid as an independent force in the industry. "We need legal counsel," Aiden advised after I shared the message. "And we need to accelerate our timeline for the conference presentation. If we can demonstrate our successful implementations before they announce their revolutionary approach, we establish clear precedents." As the team dispersed to implement our response strategy, I remained at the conference table, thumbing through my worn copy of the business plan I'd created in my grandfather's lake house 2 years earlier. There, in my own handwriting, was a note predicting exactly this scenario. Established utilities will attempt to control or discredit decentralized solutions that threaten their infrastructure monopoly. I had anticipated this conflict intellectually, but experiencing it felt different, more visceral, more urgent. This wasn't a theoretical case study from business school. It was a direct challenge to everything we'd built. My phone rang, my mother's number appearing on the screen. We hadn't spoken since the awkward dinner following our launch event 3 months ago. I almost declined the call, but curiosity won out. "Vanessa, darling," she began with unusual warmth. "We just saw Elise's segment on the morning show where she interviewed that energy executive, Tom Westfield. He mentioned some exciting new technology they're developing. Isn't that in your field?" The floor seemed to drop from beneath me. "Mom, what are you talking about? Elise interviewed Thomas Westfield? When?" "This morning, sweetheart. It was her biggest segment yet, 5 full minutes on national television about renewable energy innovations." She looked absolutely radiant in that blue blazer. I frantically opened my laptop and found the clip online. There was my sister, poised and professional, lobbing softball questions to Thomas Westfield about Consolidated Power's commitment to next-generation energy solutions for underserved communities. He described their upcoming announcement with carefully crafted language that stopped just short of claiming they had already implemented what Electrogrid had actually accomplished. "Their approach sounds very similar to what Vanessa is doing with her company," my mother continued, oblivious to the implications. "Isn't that a strange coincidence? I thought of you immediately." "Mom, it's not a coincidence," I said, struggling to keep my voice even. "Westfield's company is trying to position themselves as the innovators in technology we've already developed and implemented. And now Elise has given them a national platform to establish that narrative before we present our results next week." A pause. "Well, I'm sure Elise didn't know that, darling. She was just doing her job. The producer assigned the segment to her because of her personal connection to renewable energy innovation. She mentioned you on air, actually. Wasn't that thoughtful?" I found the mention in the clip, a brief aside where Elise noted that innovation runs in my family, before returning her full attention to Westfield's claims. The reference was so fleeting that viewers would associate innovation with Westfield, not with her unnamed family member. Did Elise know what Westfield's company was doing? I asked directly. Did she understand they're positioning themselves against Electrogrid? "Vanessa, really?" my mother chided. "Elise is a media professional. She doesn't get involved in industry rivalries. She's simply reporting on newsworthy developments." But there was a hesitation in her voice that triggered a memory. Elise standing in my apartment 6 weeks ago, ostensibly visiting while in town for another media appearance, asking casual questions about Electrogrid's conference plans while photographing the vision board in my home office. I had thought nothing of it at the time, assuming her interest was simply sisterly curiosity. "I need to speak with Elise," I said firmly. "She's in meetings all day preparing for her next segment." My mother replied, "But I'll tell her you called. We're all so proud of both our girls making waves in their respective fields." After hanging up, I sat motionless, processing this new layer of complication. Had my sister inadvertently given Westfield ammunition against Electrogrid, or had the coincidence been more calculated? Either possibility felt like a betrayal, though of different magnitudes. I forwarded the interview clip to our leadership team with a brief message. New complication. Meeting in 30 minutes to revise strategy. While waiting for the team to reassemble, I received a text from an unfamiliar number. Saw your sister's interview with my father. Awkward timing, right? That coffee offer still stands. Better to partner than compete. Eric Westfield. The message confirmed my suspicions. This was coordinated, not coincidental. The question was whether Elise had been a knowing participant or an unwitting pawn. My phone rang again. Elise this time. I answered without greeting. Before you say anything, she began defensively. I didn't know the segment would air today. It was recorded last week and was supposed to run next month in their Future Innovation series. The network moved it up without telling me. Did you know who Westfield was when you interviewed him? I asked, keeping my voice controlled. Did you know what his company is doing? A pause. I knew they were in energy, obviously. The producer said they were developing exciting new technology for rural communities. It seemed like a good opportunity. Elise, they're directly positioning against electrogrid. They're using my research to claim innovations we've already implemented. And now you've given them a national platform to establish their narrative, before we can present our results. Another pause, longer this time. I didn't. I asked about their technology, but Westfield was vague. He just emphasized their commitment to innovation and underserved communities. It sounded positive. Did you mention me to the producers? Is that why you got the assignment? Her hesitation told me everything. I might have mentioned having inside perspective on renewable energy because of my sister's work. It wasn't about taking credit, Vanessa. It was about landing an important segment. The hurt was sharp but clarifying. Even now, with tangible evidence of how her actions had potentially damaged my company, Elise couldn't fully acknowledge the impact. In her worldview, media exposure was the ultimate currency, and leveraging connections to secure it was simply good strategy. I need to go, I said. We're developing our response to this situation. Vanessa, wait, she pleaded. I didn't mean to cause problems. Maybe this is actually good publicity for your field? Gets more people interested in microgrid technology? Her attempt to reframe her involvement as potentially beneficial was so characteristic that I almost laughed. Always the spin, always the perspective that positioned her actions in the most favorable light. Goodbye, Elise, I said, ending the call. In our emergency meeting, we developed a three-pronged response: legal, technical, and narrative. Our attorneys would prepare cease and desist documentation regarding any use of our proprietary innovations. Our engineering team would accelerate preparations for the conference, focusing on verifiable data from our successful implementations. And our communication strategy would emphasize electrogrid as the proven pioneer in the space, with documented implementations already changing. Lives in real communities. What about your sister's involvement? Maya asked carefully. The family connection complicates our narrative. It was a fair question, one I had been grappling with since watching the interview. The personal betrayal stung, but allowing it to distract from our company's response would be self-defeating. My sister was doing her job as a media personality, I said finally. We stay focused on Consolidated's actions, not the channel through which they're communicating their claims. This is about intellectual property and innovation precedents, not family drama. The team nodded, relieved that I wasn't making this personal when we needed to be strategic. But after everyone departed to implement our response plan, I sat alone in the conference room, confronting the personal dimension I'd publicly set aside. The pattern was familiar. Elise advancing her interests without consideration for how her actions affected me. But this time, The stakes were different. This wasn't about family photo arrangements or holiday attention. This was about Electrogrid, the company I'd built from my grandfather's seed money and my own vision, the innovation that could transform energy access for millions of people. For the first time, I allowed myself to consider whether maintaining any relationship with my family was worth the potential cost to my life's work. The question wasn't just about hurt feelings or unequal treatment anymore. It was about recognizing that their actions, intentional or not, could actively undermine what I was building. As I gathered my materials to return to my office, my phone chimed with another text, this one from my father. Saw Elise's interview. Westfield seems impressive. Have you considered talking with them about collaboration opportunities? Might be good exposure for your project. And there it was, the fundamental misunderstanding that defined our relationship. To my father, Electrogrid would always be my project, while Consolidated Power represented serious business. Even now, facing evidence that this larger company was potentially appropriating my innovations, his instinct was to suggest I seek their validation rather than defend my legitimate claim to the technology. I didn't respond to the text. Instead, I opened my laptop and began drafting the most important presentation of my career, the one that would establish beyond any doubt that Electrogrid had not only pioneered this approach to rural energy distribution, but had already successfully implemented it where others had only theorized. This wasn't just about business strategy anymore. It was about truth, about recognition, about refusing to be erased from my own story. Themes that resonated far beyond this specific corporate conflict. The National Renewable Energy Conference bustled with activity as I navigated through crowds of industry professionals, academics, and policymakers. Normally, I would have reveled in this environment, surrounded by brilliant minds dedicated to transforming how we power our world. Today, however, my focus was singular and intense. In exactly 3 hours, Consolidated Power would take the main stage to unveil their revolutionary microgrid technology. 4 hours after that, Electrogrid would present our implementation, data from the New Mexico pilots. It was a high-stakes race to establish narrative dominance in a rapidly evolving field. While we couldn't prevent Consolidated from making their announcement, we had worked around the clock for the past week to prepare our countermeasures. "Vanessa Morgan?" a voice called from nearby. I turned to find a woman in her 50s with silver-streaked hair and keen eyes extending her hand. "Diana Collins, Department of Energy, Rural Electrification Initiative. I've been following your work in New Mexico with great interest." This unexpected introduction was precisely the kind of connection we needed. The Department of Energy's Rural Electrification Initiative controlled significant funding for projects exactly like ours. I shook her hand firmly, grateful for Aiden's insistence that I memorize faces and backgrounds of all potential strategic partners attending the conference.
Yeah.
"Ms. Collins, it's a pleasure. We're actually preparing to present our implementation data this afternoon. The results have exceeded even our optimistic projections." "I know," she replied with a knowing smile. "That's why I sought you out. I've visited your pilot site in Cedro Mesa personally. Quite impressive to see a local clinic running complex diagnostic equipment on your microgrid without a hiccup in power." I blinked in surprise. "You've already visited our implementation? That wasn't in any of our site reports. I prefer to evaluate innovations firsthand, without the dog and pony show that usually accompanies official site visits," she explained. "Your local technician, Miguel, I believe, was quite forthcoming about both the system's strengths and the challenges you've overcome. This was an unexpected development, and potentially game-changing. Having a DOE official independently verify our implementation success carried far more weight than our own presentation claims. We'd be happy to provide complete performance data," I offered. "Our monitoring systems track everything from output consistency to maintenance requirements. Already requested those from your operations team." She nodded. But I have a different question for you, Ms. Morgan. Are you aware that Consolidated Power is announcing their own microgrid system today? One that bears striking similarities to your technology? So the word was already circulating. I chose my response carefully, conscious that how I handled this question could significantly impact Electrogrid's relationship with the DOE. We're aware of their announcement. Without seeing their technical specifications, I can't comment on similarities. What I can say is that Electrogrid has fully documented our development process from initial research through implementation. Our approach is backed by 3 years of development and now proven through successful pilot deployments. Diana Collins studied me with a measured gaze. Well said, political without being evasive. She glanced at her watch. I have a meeting, but I'd like to continue this conversation. Would you join me for coffee after your presentation? Say 5:30 in the Terrace Cafe? After confirming the meeting and watching her disappear into the crowd, I immediately texted Aiden. Rural Electrification Director sought me out. Already visited our Cedro Mesa site unofficially. Meeting her after our presentation. This changes things. His response was immediate. What? This is huge. Collins controls 200 mailers in rural implementation grants. Adding this to our presentation. Now. As I continued toward our company's booth in the exhibition hall, a familiar voice stopped me cold. Vanessa, I've been looking everywhere for you. Elise hurried toward me, camera crew in tow, her professional smile firmly in place. She wore a tailored green blazer with a press badge prominently displayed, every inch the rising media personality. We're doing segment interviews with innovative companies, she explained brightly, gesturing to her crew. And I insisted we feature Electrogrid. Family connections have advantages, right? The audacity was breathtaking. After her interview with Westfield had potentially compromised our position, she now wanted to leverage our relationship for more content. This isn't a good time, Elise, I said firmly. We're preparing for our presentation. Her smile remained fixed, but her eyes flashed with irritation. It's 3 minutes, Vanessa. Perfect timing before Consolidated's big announcement. Don't you want to establish your presence first? Something in her phrasing caught my attention. How do you know what's in Consolidated's announcement? A flicker of discomfort crossed her features before the professional mask returned. General, industry buzz. Everyone's talking about it. But her momentary hesitation revealed more than she intended. Elise had additional information she shouldn't have had access to unless she was still in communication with Westfield or his team. Your segment with Thomas Westfield wasn't a coincidence, was it? I asked quietly, stepping closer to ensure the camera crew couldn't hear. You knew exactly what you were doing. Don't be paranoid, she hissed, maintaining her camera ready. Smile. It was a career opportunity. Not everything revolves around your company. Ms. Morgan? One of Electrogrid's engineers approached, tablet in hand. Sorry to interrupt, but we need your approval on the final presentation revisions. I turned to my sister with newfound clarity. I have work to do, Elise, real work that affects real people's access to essential services. If you want to interview someone from Electrogrid, contact our communications department like every other media outlet. As I walked away, Elise called after me. This is exactly why people find you difficult, Vanessa. Always the martyr, always thinking you're the only one dealing with important matters. I didn't turn back. Her words, designed to trigger old insecurities about family dynamics, fell flat against the solid foundation of purpose I'd built. Electrogrid wasn't about my personal validation. It was about transforming energy access for communities that had been systematically overlooked. That mission rendered family drama remarkably insignificant by comparison. The next hour passed in a blur of final preparations. Our team had transformed our presentation based on the new information about Diana Collins's site visit. emphasizing the real-world impact already visible in our pilot communities. We'd also prepared a technical addendum documenting our development timeline with irrefutable evidence of our innovation precedents, ready to distribute if Consolidated's announcement veered into our proprietary territory. As the time for Consolidated's presentation approached, I made a decision that surprised my team. "I'm going to attend their session," I announced during our final preparation meeting. "Are you sure that's wise?" Maya asked, concern evident in her expression. "It might be better to stay focused on our own presentation. I need to hear exactly what they're claiming," I explained. "We can't respond effectively if we're working from second-hand reports." Aiden nodded slowly. "Makes sense. But I'm coming with you, and we sit in the back, ready to leave if it gets problematic." The main conference hall was packed for Consolidated's presentation. We found seats in the last row, just as Thomas Westfield took the stage to enthusiastic applause. He cut an impressive figure, silver-haired, confidently commanding the space in an expensive suit that projected corporate authority. "For decades, rural electrification has been treated as a charity project," he began, his voice resonating through the hall. "Today, Consolidated Power is changing that paradigm with a business solution that makes economic sense while serving communities traditional utilities have overlooked." What followed was a masterclass in corporate presentation, polished slides, compelling visuals, and strategic technical details that revealed just enough to impress without exposing their full approach. But as Westfield described their revolutionary microgrid architecture, my tension gradually transformed into stunned disbelief. Consolidated wasn't presenting a plagiarized version of Electrogrid's technology. They weren't even in the same conceptual realm. Their approach relied on miniaturized traditional grid infrastructure, essentially creating smaller versions of centralized systems that would still require significant installation complexity and specialized maintenance. It was the opposite of our modular, scalable, community-maintained approach. "They missed the entire point," I whispered to Aiden, who was furiously taking notes beside me. "This isn't innovation. It's miniaturization of an obsolete approach." "They're solving the wrong problem," he agreed, expression shifting from concern to something approaching amusement. "They fundamentally don't understand why traditional infrastructure fails these communities in the first place." As Westfield concluded to enthusiastic applause, I felt an unexpected wave of relief washing over me. We hadn't been scooped or plagiarized. In fact, Consolidated's approach would serve as the perfect contrast to highlight why Electrogrid's technology represented a genuine paradigm shift rather than an incremental improvement. "We need to revise our presentation again," I told Aiden as we slipped out before the Q&A session. "Not to defend against their claims, but to illuminate the fundamental difference in thinking between miniaturizing broken systems versus reimagining how energy distribution can work." The next 3 hours were transformative. Rather than positioning ourselves against Consolidated, we restructured our presentation to focus entirely on the real-world impact of our existing implementations. We featured videos from the clinic director in Cedro Mesa describing how reliable power had expanded their medical capabilities, from teachers showing students using computers for the first time, from community leaders explaining how local residents had been trained to maintain and expand the system themselves. When I finally took the stage at 4:30, the energy in the room was electric. Industry experts who had attended Consolidated's earlier presentation now leaned forward with interest, curious about this different approach from a much smaller company. "The challenge of rural electrification isn't a technical problem," I began, departing from our planned opening. "It's a systems problem. We don't need smaller versions of centralized infrastructure. We need distributed systems that communities themselves can implement, maintain, and expand." What followed was the most important presentation of my career, not because it was the most technically impressive, but because it represented a complete reframing of my purpose. This wasn't about competing with Consolidated or proving my intellectual ownership. It was about advocating for an approach to technology that put power, literally and figuratively, into the hands of the communities we served. When I concluded by inviting representatives from our pilot communities to join me on stage, people who had traveled from New Mexico specifically to share their experiences, the audience rose in a standing ovation. Not for me, but for what we had accomplished together. As the applause continued, I spotted Elise and her camera crew at the back of the hall. For once, my sister's practiced poise had slipped, revealing genuine surprise. Beside her stood my parents, who I hadn't known, were attending the conference. My father's expression was unreadable, but my mother's face showed something I'd rarely seen directed toward me: unmistakable pride. Later, at the Terrace Cafe, Diana Collins got straight to the point. The Department of Energy is preparing to announce a major initiative for rural electrification focused on community-maintained systems. We need implementation partners with proven technology and a track record of successful deployment. She slid a folder across the table. This is a request for proposal for a 20-site implementation across 5 states, with potential expansion to another 50 sites over 3 years. The total grant allocation is $120 million. Based on what I've seen of your work, ElectraGrid would be highly competitive should you choose to apply. The magnitude of the opportunity momentarily left me speechless. 20 implementations would transform ElectraGrid from a promising startup to an established industry leader overnight. 50 more would make us the dominant player in rural electrification, nationwide. This would be a tremendous opportunity, I managed finally. One that aligns perfectly with our capabilities and mission. I thought it might, she smiled. The submission deadline is tight, 3 weeks. But given your existing documentation and implementation data, I don't anticipate that being an issue. As we discussed logistics and expectations, my phone buzzed repeatedly with messages. Congratulations from team members who couldn't attend, requests for interviews from industry publications, and surprisingly, texts from both my parents. From my father. Your presentation was impressive. Clear, substantive, impactful. We should talk about what you've built here. From my mother. We had no idea, sweetheart. Truly remarkable work. So proud of you today. I set the phone aside without responding. Their sudden recognition, while gratifying on some level, felt hollow against the backdrop of years of dismissal. More importantly, it was a distraction from the transformative opportunity sitting across the table from me. One last question, Diana said, as our meeting concluded. Consolidated Power will undoubtedly bid on this project as well. Their resources vastly exceed yours. Does that concern you? I considered this carefully before responding. Resources matter, but understanding the actual problem matters more. Consolidated is trying to miniaturize centralized infrastructure. We've redesigned energy distribution from first principles specifically for these environments. That fundamental difference in approach will be evident in implementation outcomes, regardless of company size. She nodded, seeming satisfied with this response. That's what I thought you'd say, and what I hoped you'd say. She extended her hand. I look forward to reviewing ElectraGrid's proposal, Ms. Morgan. As I watched her leave, the significance of the day settled over me. This wasn't just a professional turning point. It represented a fundamental shift in how I viewed my own journey. For years, I had defined myself partially in opposition to my family's lack of recognition, using their dismissal as fuel for my determination to succeed. Now, standing on the threshold of an opportunity that could transform both ElectraGrid and the communities we served, I realized that narrative no longer served me. My purpose wasn't to prove my family wrong. It was to prove our approach right. The distinction was subtle but profound, shifting my orientation from the past to the future, from personal validation to genuine impact. My phone buzzed again. Aiden. requesting my return to the team gathering at our booth to celebrate the presentation's success. As I walked back through the conference hall, I passed the consolidated power display where Thomas Westfield was holding court with a group of potential clients. Our eyes met briefly, his narrowing with recognition before I continued on my way. He no longer mattered. None of the obstacles or doubts mattered. What mattered was the path forward, a path that had suddenly widened into a highway of possibility. The 3 weeks following the conference transformed Electrogrid in ways I couldn't have imagined. Diana Collins's grant opportunity wasn't just a potential contract. It became the catalyst for a complete reinvention of our company's scale and vision. Our modest office suddenly buzzed with new energy as we expanded our team, bringing on specialized engineers with rural implementation experience and community engagement experts who understood the cultural dimensions of introducing new technology. We moved from reactive startup mode into structured scaling mode, developing systems and processes that could support rapid growth while maintaining quality. We need to think differently now, I explained during an all-hands meeting in our newly rented adjacent office space. This isn't just about proving our concept anymore. It's about building an organization that can implement at scale while preserving what makes our approach revolutionary: community ownership and sustainability. The Department of Energy proposal became our North Star, not just a document to win funding, but a blueprint for transforming Electrogrid from promising innovation to industry-changing force. Every department contributed their expertise, from engineering refining our deployment methodology to operations developing a scalable training program for community technicians. In the midst of this controlled chaos, I received an unexpected email from Eric Westfield, Thomas's son and my former MIT connection. Vanessa, heard about the DOE Rural Electrification Initiative. Impressive how you've positioned Electrogrid. My father remains convinced that our miniaturized infrastructure approach is superior, but after seeing both presentations, I have concerns about our direction. Would value a conversation about potential collaboration rather than competition. This isn't an official overture from Consolidated, just a personal inquiry. Eric. I stared at the message, unsure how to interpret it. Was this a genuine recognition of Electrogrid's superior approach, or a sophisticated attempt to gather intelligence on our DOE proposal? After Consolidated's earlier behavior, skepticism seemed prudent. I drafted a polite but non-committal response. Eric, appreciate your outreach, currently focused on our DOE proposal and implementation scaling. Happy to discuss potential collaboration after this intense period has passed. Vanessa. As I hit send, Maya appeared in my doorway. The community liaisons from New Mexico are here for their training sessions, and your 2-hour investor call got moved up to 1:30. The pace was relentless but exhilarating. We were building something that mattered. Something with the potential to fundamentally change how rural communities accessed essential services. The long hours and constant pressure felt purposeful rather than draining. One evening, working late to finalize the technical specifications for our proposal, I was startled by a knock on my office door. Looking up, I found my father standing, awkwardly in the doorway, looking out of place in his business suit amid our startup's casual environment. Your assistant said you were still here, he explained, gesturing vaguely behind him. I was in town for a conference and thought, well, I thought we might have dinner. The request was so unexpected that I momentarily couldn't formulate a response. It had been nearly 2 weeks since the Renewable Energy Conference, and I hadn't replied to either of my parents' messages. I'm in the middle of something critical, I said finally, gesturing to the documents spread across my desk. We have a major proposal deadline in 4 days. He nodded, clearly uncomfortable but surprisingly persistent. I understand. Perhaps I could wait? Or help? I do have some experience with government contract proposals. The offer was so incongruous with our historical relationship that I almost laughed. My father had never shown the slightest interest in my work, let alone offered practical assistance. Now he wanted to help with technical specifications for microgrid implementations. This isn't a typical government contract, I explained, keeping my tone neutral. It's a specialized grant for rural electrification using our proprietary technology. Of course, he acknowledged, stepping further into the office and glancing around at the whiteboards covered in technical diagrams and implementation timelines. Your presentation at the conference made that clear. It was impressive. There was an awkward pause as we both recognized the inadequacy of the compliment against the backdrop of years of dismissal. "Why are you really here, Dad?" I asked, directly setting aside my documents. After 15 years of minimal interest in my work, this sudden appearance seems out of character. He sighed, finally dropping the pretense of casual visit. "Your mother and I have been doing some reflecting since the conference. Seeing you on that stage, hearing how those community representatives spoke about the impact of your work, it forced us to confront some uncomfortable truths about how we've treated you." I remained silent, waiting for him to continue. "We've always focused more on Elise," he admitted, the words clearly difficult for him. "Not because we loved her more, but because we understood her world. Her goals made sense to us: visibility, social recognition, the kind of success other people immediately comprehend. Your path was less accessible to us." "You mean less valuable," I corrected quietly. He shook his head. "Less comprehensible. We didn't understand what you were building or why it mattered. That was our failure, not yours." The admission was unprecedented, but it arrived too late to fulfill its intended purpose. The father standing before me seeking reconciliation seemed like a stranger, someone I recognized physically, but whose emotional significance had been hollowed out by years of indifference. "I appreciate you saying that," I said carefully. "But I'm in the middle of something transformative for Electrogrid. This proposal could determine the trajectory of everything we've built. I need to stay focused." He nodded, clearly disappointed but accepting. "I understand. Perhaps another time when things are less intense." As he turned to leave, he paused, at the door. "For what it's worth, Vanessa, your grandfather would have been extraordinarily proud of what you've created. He always said you saw systems others missed." The reference to my grandfather, the one person who had truly believed in my potential from the beginning, stirred unexpected emotion. But I remained composed, offering a simple "thank you" as my father departed. After he left, I sat motionless, processing the interaction. The validation I had once desperately craved from my parents now felt strangely irrelevant, meaningful in a historical sense but disconnected from my current reality. While they had been dismissing my computer thing, I had built something with the potential to transform lives across multiple communities, something that had attracted attention from the Department of Energy and potential investment partners. The realization was liberating. I no longer needed their understanding to validate my choices. My work spoke for itself in ways far more eloquent and consequential than parental approval ever could. Returning to the proposal with renewed focus, I worked until midnight, finalizing technical specifications that would demonstrate Electrogrid's readiness for rapid scaling. When I finally headed home, the city streets were quiet, most office buildings dark except for security lighting. But Electrogrid's windows still glowed on the third floor, where Aiden and the engineering team were working through implementation scenarios for our most challenging proposed sites. The next morning, I arrived to find an expensive floral arrangement waiting on my assistant's desk. "From your parents," she explained, handing me the small envelope that accompanied it. Inside was a simple note. "We've been reading about Electrogrid in the industry press. Your vision and persistence are remarkable. We're sorry it took us so long to see what you were building. With pride and admiration. Mom and Dad." I placed the card back in its envelope and handed the flowers to my assistant. "These would look nice in the reception area," I suggested. "The whole team should enjoy them." She gave me a searching look but didn't comment, simply nodding and moving the arrangement to the front office. She had been with Electrogrid long enough to understand that my focus needed to remain undiluted by family complications, especially during this critical period. The final days before our proposal submission passed in a blur of activity. The document we produced wasn't merely a bid for funding, it was a comprehensive vision for transforming rural electrification across 5 states, with detailed implementation. Plans for each community, training protocols for local maintenance teams, and metrics for measuring both technical performance and social impact. When we finally submitted the completed proposal, all 247 pages plus technical appendices, the entire team gathered in our conference room for a moment of shared accomplishment. Whether we win this grant or not, I told them, raising a glass of champagne. What we've created here represents a new standard for community-centered technology implementation. Every person in this room has contributed something essential to that vision. To Electrogrid, Aiden proposed, raising his glass, and to Vanessa, who saw a different approach when everyone else was stuck in the old paradigm. The toast was followed by genuine applause, not the polite acknowledgement of hierarchical achievement, but the authentic recognition of peers who understood the significance of what we had built together. As the celebration continued, I stepped outside for a moment of quiet reflection. The night air was cool and clear, stars visible despite the city lights. I thought about my grandfather and his belief in solving problems worth solving, about the communities in New Mexico already experiencing the impact of reliable electricity, about the potential to expand that impact 50-fold if our proposal succeeded. My phone vibrated with a text from Elise. Heard about your DOE proposal from industry contacts. Sounds impressive. Network interested in doing a feature on women in renewable energy. Perfect opportunity to share your story. Call me? The message was so characteristic of our relationship, ostensibly supportive but ultimately self-serving, framing my work primarily as content for her career advancement. In the past, I might have felt compelled to respond, to either reject her offer indignantly or accept it, hoping for genuine recognition. Instead, I simply put the phone back in my pocket without replying. Elise's validation, like my parents', belonged to a narrative I had outgrown. My worth wasn't determined by their acknowledgement, and my story wasn't primarily about being overlooked by my family. It was about creating systems that worked differently, that served people traditionally left behind by conventional approaches. When I rejoined the celebration inside, Maya pulled me aside with an expression of barely contained excitement. "Diana Collins just called," she whispered. She couldn't share details officially, but she wanted us to know that our proposal exceeded expectations and we should be prepared for significant developments next week. The news spread quickly through the room, elevating the celebration, from accomplishment to anticipation. If Diana's hint proved accurate, Electrogrid was about to enter an entirely new phase of existence, one where our approach would have the resources and platform to demonstrate its full potential at scale. As I looked around at my team, brilliant, dedicated people who had chosen to believe in our vision when we were just a small startup with ambitious ideas, I felt a profound sense of responsibility mixed with exhilaration. We weren't just building a company. We were reinventing an approach to technology implementation that centered community needs and capabilities rather than corporate control. That night, returning to my apartment after the celebration, I found myself drawn to the small box of mementos I'd kept from my grandfather's lake house. Inside, among his old notebooks and drafting tools, was a battered compass he had carried throughout his construction career. "True north doesn't change just because you're lost," he used to tell me, demonstrating how the needle always found its orientation regardless of surrounding conditions. I placed the compass on my bedside table, a reminder that my own true north had remained constant even when external recognition wavered. The reinvention Electrogrid was undergoing wasn't about changing direction. It was about expanding capacity to travel further along a path we had already proven correct. The family that had once erased me from their narrative no longer defined mine. I was writing a different story now, one measured not in holiday photos or parental pride, but in communities transformed and systems reimagined. That was a legacy, worth building, with or without my name properly captioned in the family album. The email from the Department of Energy arrived on a Tuesday morning. Its bureaucratic subject line, Grant Proposal, REC 2023-0472 Notification, belying its transformative contents. I was alone in my office, having arrived early to prepare for our weekly leadership meeting when the notification appeared in my inbox. For a moment, I simply stared at it, aware that whatever it contained would irrevocably alter Electrogrid's trajectory. With a deep breath, I clicked to open the message. Dear Ms. Morgan, the Department of Energy is pleased to inform you that Electrogrid's proposal for the Rural Electrification Initiative has been selected as the primary implementation partner for the 20-site pilot program, with conditional approval for the 50-site expansion pending initial implementation success. The words blurred as I continued reading. We had secured not just the initial 20 implementations, but conditional approval for the full program, a commitment potentially worth over $120 million. The scale of the victory momentarily overwhelmed me. I sat perfectly still, allowing the magnitude of the achievement to settle. This wasn't merely a contract win, it was validation of our entire approach. A federal agency with rigorous evaluation standards had reviewed all available options and determined that Electrogrid's community-centered model represented the most promising path forward for rural electrification nationwide. My phone rang, Diana Collins calling directly rather than through her office channels. I wanted to congratulate you personally, she said when I answered. Your proposal wasn't just technically superior. It demonstrated a fundamental understanding of why previous rural electrification efforts have failed. The community maintenance component particularly impressed the evaluation committee. Thank you, I replied, my voice steadier than I expected. This represents an extraordinary opportunity to demonstrate the viability of distributed systems at scale. It's more than that, Diana countered. This selection positions Electrogrid's approach as the new standard for rural infrastructure implementation. The implications extend far beyond these specific projects. After we discussed next steps and immediate priorities, I sat at my desk, processing the implications of her words. The new standard. The phrase carried weight beyond its literal meaning, suggesting a paradigm shift in how essential services reached underserved communities. I thought of my grandfather and his belief in systems thinking, in seeing connections others missed. This moment represented the convergence of everything he had taught me, about understanding fundamental problems, about building solutions that last, about creating value that transcends individual recognition. When Aiden arrived 30 minutes later, I was still sitting at my desk, the printed acceptance letter before me. Is that, he asked, immediately recognizing the Department of Energy letterhead. I nodded, pushing the document toward him. We got everything. All 20 initial sites and conditional approval for the 50-site expansion. His eyes widened as he scanned the document. This changes everything. It does. I agreed. Gather the leadership team. I want everyone to hear this together. Within an hour, our core team assembled in the conference room. Aiden, Maya, our lead engineers, the implementation specialist we'd recently hired. Their expressions ranged from nervous anticipation to cautious hope as I stood before them. Electrogrid has been selected as the primary implementation partner for the Department of Energy's Rural Electrification Initiative, I announced simply. Full approval for all 20 initial sites and conditional approval for the 50-site expansion. The room erupted in cheers, the normally reserved engineers high-fiving while Maya wiped away unexpected tears. This wasn't just professional success. It was collective validation of a vision we had all committed to building, despite skepticism from established industry players. This isn't just about electrogrid, I continued when the celebration quieted. This selection represents a fundamental shift in how rural infrastructure is approached. The DOE has chosen community-centered modular design over traditional centralized systems. That's a victory for a different way of thinking about technology implementation. We spent the rest of the meeting outlining immediate next steps, expanding our implementation team, establishing regional training centers, developing enhanced quality control systems for larger-scale production. What had been theoretical planning now required concrete action. As the team dispersed to begin their respective tasks, Maya stayed behind, sitting across from me with an expression of quiet assessment. "You don't seem as ecstatic as I expected," she observed. "This is everything we've been working toward." I considered her observation, realizing she was right. My response to this monumental achievement wasn't the unbridled joy one might expect, but something deeper and more complex. "It's not that I'm not thrilled," I explained. "It's that this feels right, like confirmation of something I already knew to be true, rather than a surprise outcome." She nodded slowly. "The validation matters, though, especially after everything with Consolidated and your family." "It does," I acknowledged, "but not in the way I might have once thought. This isn't about proving people wrong anymore. It's about proving our approach right." The distinction was subtle but profound, a shift from extrinsic validation to intrinsic certainty, from seeking recognition to creating impact. The achievement felt significant precisely because it transcended personal vindication and represented genuine systemic change. After Maya left, I called the team members who had been with Electrogrid from the beginning, the engineers who had worked unpaid during our earliest days, the community specialists who had helped develop our training programs when we had barely enough funding to cover their travel expenses. These conversations, expressing gratitude for their early belief in our vision, felt more meaningful than any public announcement. By late afternoon, industry news outlets had caught wind of the DOE's decision. My phone began buzzing with congratulatory messages and interview requests from renewable energy publications. Our communications director, recently hired but already proving invaluable, helped filter these requests into manageable priorities. Amid this flurry of external response, a text arrived from an unexpected source. Consolidated just announced it lost the DOE bid. Dad's livid. Board meeting called for tomorrow. Might be opportunities in the fallout. Coffee still on the table if you're interested. Eric Westfield. The message confirmed rumors that Consolidated had considered the rural electrification initiative a guaranteed win, leveraging their size and established relationship with federal agencies. Our selection represented not just a victory for Electrogrid, but a significant setback for a company unaccustomed to losing government contracts. Rather than satisfaction at their disappointment, I felt a strange empathy for Eric's position, caught between corporate loyalty and apparent recognition that Electrogrid's approach was superior. His consistent outreach suggested genuine interest in our model, rather than simple opportunism. After consideration, I responded, "Major implementation planning underway. Coffee possible next week. This isn't about winners and losers, but finding the right solution for communities that need reliable power." Setting my phone aside, I turned to the wall of my office where we had mounted a map marking all 70 potential implementation sites across 5 states. Communities with names few urban Americans would recognize, places overlooked by conventional infrastructure development, places where Electrogrid's technology would transform essential services from healthcare to education. This was the quiet victory within the larger achievement, not the contract value or industry recognition, but the tangible impact our work would have on real people's lives. Villages where clinics could now operate medical equipment reliably, where schools could implement digital learning, where local residents would be trained to maintain and eventually expand their own power systems rather than depending on distant utilities. As I studied the map, a knock at my doorframe drew my attention. My assistant stood holding a large envelope. "Special delivery," she explained. "Courier said it was important." Inside the envelope was a single document, the cover of the upcoming issue of Innovation Impact magazine featuring a photo of me on stage at the Renewable Energy Conference, alongside the headline, "Power Shift: How Vanessa Morgan's Electrogrid is Revolutionizing Rural Electrification." The accompanying note from the editor explained that they had accelerated their publication schedule to feature Electrogrid selection for the DOE initiative, requesting an interview to complete their cover story. I set the magazine cover on my desk, studying the image of myself mid-presentation, gesturing toward implementation data from our New Mexico pilots. The photographer had captured a moment of complete absorption in explaining our technology's impact, not posing for effect or seeking recognition, but genuinely engaged in communicating something I believed mattered. It was, I realized, the first time I had appeared on a magazine cover, something my sister had achieved years earlier for her media work. But while Elise had actively pursued such visibility as an end in itself, this recognition had emerged organically from focusing on the work itself rather than its potential for publicity. As if summoned by this thought, my phone displayed an incoming call from my mother. I hesitated before answering, uncertain what this conversation would entail. "Vanessa, darling," she began, her voice carrying an unfamiliar tone of genuine enthusiasm. "We just saw the announcement about the Department of Energy contract. It's all over the industry news sites. Your father's colleagues are calling to ask if we're related to that Morgan from Electrogrid." The pride in her voice was unmistakable and complex in its implications. After years of dismissing my work as a computer thing and too ambitious, my parents were now eager to claim connection to my suddenly visible success. "It's a significant opportunity," I acknowledged, keeping my tone neutral. "The initiative will allow us to implement our technology across 70 communities over the next 3 years. 70 communities! That's extraordinary," she exclaimed. "Your father says the contract value must be enormous. We're so proud, sweetheart, so proud." The words I had once desperately wanted to hear now landed with complicated resonance. Their pride felt genuine but conditional, attached to external validation rather than understanding of what I had actually built. "Thank you," I said simply. "It's been a team effort." "We'd love to take you to dinner to celebrate," she continued. "Somewhere special. Your father suggested that new place overlooking the harbor. Elise could join too. Make it a family celebration." The invitation sparked an unexpected moment of clarity. A family celebration now, when success had made headlines, would serve their narrative more than mine. It would allow them to incorporate my achievement into a revised family story where they had always supported my unique talents rather than dismissed them. "I appreciate the thought," I replied carefully. "But we're in intensive implementation planning now. The DOE has an accelerated timeline for the first 5 sites." Of course, my mother backpedaled. "Whenever works." "With your schedule. We just want to celebrate properly." After completing the call with non-committal promises to check my calendar, I stood at my office window, watching the late afternoon sun reflect off neighboring buildings. The city continued its normal rhythms, unaware that 70 rural communities would soon experience a transformation in their access to essential services. That evening, I drove to my grandfather's lake house, now my weekend retreat and occasional thinking space. Sitting on the dock where he had once taught me about load-bearing structures and systems thinking, I watched the sunset paint the water with streaks of orange and gold. This quiet moment, alone with the achievement and its implications, felt more genuine than any public celebration or family dinner could provide. The validation that mattered most wasn't splashed across magazine covers or expressed in newfound parental pride. It resided in the knowledge that our technology would create genuine, measurable improvement in communities that had been systematically overlooked. As darkness settled over the lake, I made a decision about how Electrogrid would navigate its sudden prominence. We would focus relentlessly on implementation excellence rather than publicity. We would document outcomes meticulously, creating an irrefutable case for our approach. And we would develop open-source training materials that would allow our model to spread beyond our direct implementations. This wasn't just about building a successful company anymore. It was about changing how essential infrastructure reached underserved communities, about creating a model that could be replicated globally. The stars emerged above the lake, their reflection creating twin constellations on the water's surface. Tomorrow would bring the logistical challenges of rapid scaling, the media requests that accompanied sudden recognition, and the complex navigation of newfound industry influence. But tonight, in this moment of quiet reflection, the achievement felt complete in itself. Not a step toward validation, but the natural outcome of pursuing work that mattered. The headlines and magazine covers would fade. The family dynamics would remain complicated, but the impact of Electrogrid's technology on those 70 communities would endure, creating ripple effects far beyond our direct implementation. That was the victory worth savoring, not loud and public, but deep and consequential. I stayed by the lake until the night air grew cool, then returned to the house my grandfather had left me, the foundation from which Electrogrid had grown from concept to industry-changing reality. Tomorrow would be soon enough to navigate the bright spotlight of success. Tonight belonged to the quieter satisfaction of knowing our work would change lives in ways that transcended recognition or headlines. 6 months into the Department of Energy initiative, Electrogrid had successfully implemented our technology in 8 rural communities. Each installation had gone smoothly, with performance metrics exceeding projections and community feedback overwhelmingly positive. The DOE's quarterly review praised our exceptional execution and industry-leading community integration methodology. By all objective measures, we were succeeding beyond expectations. So why was I standing in my office at 2:17 a.m., staring at spreadsheets I'd reviewed a dozen times already, feeling a creeping sense of inadequacy? The quarterly board meeting scheduled for tomorrow morning loomed in my mind. Our recently expanded board, now including 2 experienced industry executives and a former energy policy advisor, would be reviewing our implementation progress and scaling strategy. The materials were meticulously prepared, the data impressive, the forward-looking plans solid. Yet, as I reviewed our projections for the remaining sites, a familiar voice had resurfaced in my thoughts. The internal critic I thought I'd silenced months ago. Are you sure this isn't just luck? Maybe the first 8 communities were easier implementations. What happens when you hit real complications? The board will see through your confidence then. I pushed away from my desk, walking to the window overlooking the city. Most buildings stood dark at this hour, but Electrogrid's offices showed scattered lights where implementation teams worked across time zones with our field personnel. The company had grown from 12 people to nearly 70 in 6 months. We'd moved to larger offices, established regional training centers, and developed enhanced manufacturing partnerships to meet the DOE timeline. The scaling had been rapid but controlled, each step carefully planned and executed. So why did I feel like we were one mistake away from collapse? My phone vibrated with a text from Aiden. Just saw your office light. Everything okay? Even at this hour, he was still working, reviewing technical specifications for our next implementation site, a particularly challenging location in northern Montana with extreme weather conditions. Just pre-meeting anxiety, I replied honestly. Go home and sleep. His response came quickly. Coming up. Coffee or whiskey? 20 minutes later, we sat in my office, both nursing small glasses of bourbon, a ritual we'd established during Electrogrid's earliest days when facing seemingly insurmountable challenges. "Talk to me," Aiden said simply, his normally energetic demeanor quieted by the late hour. "What if we've been lucky?" I asked, finally voicing the doubt that had been circling my thoughts. "What if the next 12 implementations reveal fundamental flaws in our approach?" He considered this seriously, not dismissing it as irrational worry. "That's always possible. But it's not probable, and here's why. We designed our system for the most challenging conditions, not the easiest ones. If anything, the first implementations should have been the most difficult because we had less experience." His logic was sound, yet the doubt persisted. "The board will be looking for weaknesses tomorrow. They've managed larger companies, overseen bigger projects. They'll see what we're missing." "Good," Aiden replied unexpectedly. "That's literally why we brought them on. To help us see what we might miss. Their experience isn't a threat. It's an asset." I sipped my bourbon, letting his perspective penetrate the fog of anxiety. "This isn't really about the board meeting, is it?" He shook his head. "I don't think so. Want to tell me what it's actually about?" The real source of my doubt was harder to articulate. It wasn't about Electrogrid's technology or implementation strategy, both of which had been validated repeatedly. It wasn't even about our capacity to scale, which was proceeding according to plan. "I had lunch with my mother yesterday," I said finally. Aiden's eyebrows rose slightly. He knew enough about my family history to understand the significance of this statement. "She showed me a photo album she's creating, the Morgan family legacy, she's calling it. It features Elise's media career, of course, but now it also includes magazine articles about Electrogrid, photos of me from industry events, even a picture of her and my father at the lake house from 20 years ago, as if they've always been supportive of my path." "Revisionist history," Aiden observed. "Exactly. She's rewriting the narrative to include me now that there's external validation of my work. And what bothers me most is that she genuinely seems to believe this new version of events. She talked about how they always knew I was building something special, and how they're so proud of how I've overcome obstacles. When they were the obstacles," Aiden finished. I nodded, the core of my discomfort finally clarified. What if I'm doing the same thing? Creating a narrative about Electrogrid's success that ignores potential problems? What if I've become so invested in proving our approach works that I'm blind to its limitations? Aiden set his glass down, considering this carefully. That's a legitimate concern for any founder. But there's a difference between confidence based on evidence and delusion that ignores reality. Your parents reconstructed history to avoid confronting their failure to support you. Are you ignoring data that contradicts Electrogrid's success? No, I admitted. Our performance metrics are solid across all implementations. Are you dismissing feedback from communities or implementation teams? The opposite. We've modified our approach based on field learnings after each installation. Then what you're experiencing isn't delusion. It's the natural doubt that accompanies responsibility, he concluded. You're not afraid of being wrong. You're afraid of missing something important because the stakes are so high for these communities. His assessment resonated with a clarity that cut through my tangled thoughts. This wasn't about fear of failure in the conventional sense. It was about the weight of knowing that real people's access to essential services depended on our technology functioning as promised. The board meeting tomorrow isn't a test to pass, he continued. It's an opportunity to engage experienced perspectives in strengthening our approach. If there are legitimate weaknesses in our scaling strategy, better to identify them now with their help than discover them after 20 more implementations. The perspective shift was subtle, but powerful. I had been viewing the board as evaluators rather than collaborators, positioning myself mentally as defending our approach rather than refining it with their input. When did you get so insightful? I asked, attempting lightness despite the hour and the seriousness of the conversation. I've had a good teacher, he replied with a tired smile. Some CEO who's always talking about systems thinking and seeing connections others miss. We finished our bourbon in comfortable silence, the acute edge of my anxiety dulled by clearer understanding of its source. The doubt hadn't disappeared, but it had transformed from paralyzing uncertainty to constructive caution, a natural component of responsible leadership rather than evidence of inadequacy. As Aiden left to catch a few hours of sleep before the morning meeting, he paused at the door. You know what the difference is between you and your parents? What's that? I asked. You're willing to question your own narrative. That's why you'll never actually become what you fear. His observation stayed with me as I finally headed home for a brief rest before the day ahead. The distinction he'd identified was meaningful, not just for understanding my family dynamics, but for navigating Electrogrid's growth with integrity. Confidence wasn't the absence of doubt, but the willingness to examine it honestly, rather than suppress it. The board meeting the next morning was nothing like the interrogation I had feared. Instead, it evolved into a collaborative strategic session where our new directors offered valuable insights drawn from their extensive experience. Loretta Chen, former energy policy advisor, identified potential regulatory challenges in 2 of our upcoming implementation regions and suggested proactive engagement strategies with local utilities. James Hartford, who had scaled renewable technology companies before, recommended modifications to our manufacturing partnerships to improve quality control during rapid expansion. Rather than defensively justifying our existing approach, I found myself genuinely integrating their perspectives, recognizing how their experience could strengthen our implementation strategy. The meeting ended with clear action items and a shared sense of purpose rather than the judgment I had anticipated. As we concluded, Hartford pulled me aside. I've served on dozens of boards, Vanessa. Rarely have I seen a founder so open to constructive input while maintaining clear vision. That balanced leadership is what will allow Electrogrid to scale successfully. His comment, delivered matter-of-factly rather than as empty praise, provided external confirmation of what Aiden had helped me recognize internally. The capacity to integrate doubt productively rather than be paralyzed by it was a leadership strength, not a weakness. That afternoon, I met with our implementation teams to incorporate the board's recommendations into our planning for the Montana site. The engineers had identified specific cold weather modifications needed for our standard units, and the community engagement specialists had developed enhanced training protocols for maintenance during severe winter conditions. As we worked through these adaptations, I found my earlier doubts transforming into focused problem-solving. This wasn't about proving our approach was perfect. It was about continuously refining it to meet diverse community needs across varying environmental conditions. By late evening, we had developed comprehensive modifications for extreme weather implementations that would become standard protocols for similar sites. What had begun as anxiety about potential limitations had evolved into tangible improvements to our system design. Driving home, I received an unexpected call from Eric Westfield. After months of sporadic text exchanges, we had finally scheduled that coffee meeting for the following week. I wanted to give you a heads up before our meeting, he said, his tone unusually direct. I'm leaving Consolidated Power. The board is announcing it tomorrow. The news was surprising, but not entirely unexpected. Rumors had circulated about internal conflicts at Consolidated, following their failed bid for the DOE initiative. That's a significant move, I responded. Are you at liberty to share why? He hesitated before answering. The official reason? We'll be pursuing other opportunities. But the reality is more complicated. After your DOE selection, I pushed for Consolidated to explore a similar community-centered approach for our smaller projects. The board disagreed. They're doubling, Down on miniaturized conventional infrastructure despite the evidence that your model is more effective. His frankness was striking, a senior executive acknowledging his company's strategic error rather than defending it. That must have been a difficult position, I offered. It clarified things, actually, he replied. I've been questioning our approach since the Renewable Energy Conference. Your presentation made me realize we were solving the wrong problem. When the board refused to even consider adaptations based on electrogrid success data, I knew it was time to leave. The conversation continued, Eric sharing his perspective on Consolidated's resistance to innovation and his own evolving thoughts about effective energy distribution models. Throughout, I was struck by his willingness to question established thinking, a quality rarely associated with executives at traditional utility companies. As we ended the call, he added, I'm looking forward to our coffee next week. I have some ideas I'd like to discuss, ways your approach might be applied in contexts beyond rural communities. After hanging up, I sat in my parked car processing this unexpected development. Eric's departure from Consolidated represented more than one executive's career change. It signaled potential shifts in how established industry players might respond to electrogrid's proven success. The doubt I had felt earlier now seemed not just manageable, but actually valuable, a necessary component of responsible innovation. By acknowledging potential limitations and actively seeking diverse perspectives to address them, we were building a more resilient approach than would have been possible through blind confidence alone. I thought again of my mother's revised family narrative and the contrast with how we were approaching electrogrid's growth. We weren't creating a sanitized success story that ignored challenges or contradictory evidence. We were building a company that incorporated doubt as a design feature, rather than treating it as a defect, using it to strengthen our approach rather than undermining it. As I finally headed home, the city lights reflected on wet pavement from an evening rain. The sight reminded me of something my grandfather used to say about his construction projects. The strength of a foundation isn't revealed in perfect conditions, but in how it handles the unexpected. The doubt I had experienced wasn't weakness. It was the necessary questioning that ensured our foundation remained strong as we built something designed to last, something that would continue functioning long after the headlines faded and the initial excitement passed. That was a different kind of confidence, not the absence of uncertainty, but the integration of it into a more resilient approach. Not the elimination of questions, but the courage to ask them openly and respond to what they revealed. 1 year after receiving the Department of Energy grant, Electrogrid stood at a critical crossroads. We had successfully implemented our technology in 23 communities across 5 states, with performance data consistently exceeding projections. The DOE had officially approved the 50-site expansion, securing our implementation pipeline for the next 2 years. By conventional metrics, we were an unqualified success story. Yet success had created a new set of strategic questions that required careful consideration. Increasingly, we received inquiries from contexts beyond our original focus. International development organizations seeking solutions for remote villages in Southeast Asia, island nations facing infrastructure challenges due to climate change, even wealthy communities wanting backup systems independent from aging utility grids. These opportunities presented a fundamental strategic question. Should Electrogrid remain focused exclusively on rural electrification in underserved American communities, or should we expand our mission to address similar challenges in different contexts? This wasn't merely a business growth decision, but a question about our core purpose and impact philosophy. The board was divided, with some directors advocating for focused completion of the DOE initiative before considering expansion, while others argued for strategic diversification to maximize our technology's impact. To navigate this complex decision, I organized a 3-day strategic retreat at my grandfather's lake house, bringing together our leadership team, key board members, and significantly, representatives from communities where our technology had been implemented. Their lived experience with electrogrid systems would provide essential perspective often missing from corporate strategy sessions. The first day focused on understanding the full spectrum of potential directions. Each option was mapped on whiteboards covering the walls of the lake house's great room, from geographic expansion into international markets to technological diversification beyond electricity, into water purification systems using similar distributed principles. Elena Yazzie, a community coordinator from our second implementation site in New Mexico, studied the possibilities with thoughtful consideration. These all represent important needs, she observed, but expanding too quickly risks losing what makes electrogrid different: the deep community integration. That takes time and presence. Her practical wisdom cut through the abstract strategic discussions, reminding us that our success stemmed not just from technological innovation, but from our implementation methodology. Communities weren't merely recipients of our technology. They were active participants in its deployment and maintenance. As the sun set over the lake, casting long shadows across the dock where my grandfather had once taught me about systems thinking, I found myself contemplating not just what electrogrid could become, but what it should become. Growth for its own sake wasn't our objective. Impact was. But how to maximize that impact without diluting the core principles that made our approach effective? The second day focused on evaluation criteria. Rather than simply weighing financial projections or market size, we developed a multidimensional framework that included impact potential. How many people would gain access to reliable electricity? Implementation integrity. Could we maintain our community-centered approach at scale? Technological fit. Was our current technology appropriate for the context, or would it require significant adaptation? Organizational readiness. Did we have the capabilities and resources necessary to succeed? Mission alignment. Did the direction honor our foundational purpose of democratizing access to essential services? This framework transformed abstract possibilities into concrete evaluations, allowing us to assess each strategic option against consistent criteria, rather than personal preferences or conventional growth assumptions. By late afternoon, a pattern emerged from our assessment. The options that scored highest weren't distinguished by geography or market size, but by a common characteristic: contexts where conventional centralized infrastructure approaches had failed or were financially impractical. This insight crystallized during dinner when Miguel Dominguez, our lead field engineer who had overseen 12 implementations, made a simple observation. We're not in the electricity business, we're in the infrastructure paradigm business. His statement shifted the entire conversation. Electrogrid's core innovation wasn't simply a more efficient solar panel or battery system. It was a fundamentally different approach to infrastructure deployment, one that centered community capabilities, modular scaling, and distributed maintenance rather than centralized control and specialized expertise. Viewed through this lens, the strategic question transformed. Where else could this infrastructure paradigm create significant impact beyond rural electrification? The final day of our retreat began with this reframed question. Rather than debating geographic markets or product extensions, we examined infrastructure challenges where centralized approaches consistently failed underserved populations: water purification systems, telecommunications access, even medical, cold storage for vaccines in remote areas. As we worked through these possibilities, Loretta Chen, our board member with energy policy expertise, pointed out an important constraint. Each new domain requires domain-specific expertise we don't currently have. Trying to solve everything simultaneously would stretch our resources and risk our implementation quality. Her caution resonated, especially given my earlier fears about scaling too quickly. Electrogrid's success stemmed partially from our deep understanding of energy distribution challenges. Moving into entirely new domains without similar expertise could undermine our effectiveness, regardless of how well our paradigm transferred conceptually. The strategic picture clarified further when Aiden suggested a middle path. What if we create an open innovation framework? We continue focusing our direct implementation on electricity systems where we have proven expertise, but we document and share our community-centered methodology so others can apply it to different infrastructure challenges. This approach struck a powerful balance, maintaining focused excellence in our core domain while enabling broader impact through knowledge sharing rather than direct expansion. It acknowledged our limitations while leveraging our unique insights. As the retreat concluded, a consensus emerged around 3 strategic priorities. First, complete the DOE initiative with excellence, demonstrating irrefutable evidence that our community-centered approach outperformed traditional models across diverse environments and communities. Second, develop an open implementation framework, documenting our methodology, making it freely available to organizations addressing other infrastructure challenges through a nonprofit foundation we would establish. Third, selectively pilot our approach in 3 international contexts where conventional electricity infrastructure had consistently failed, partnering with experienced local organizations rather than attempting to expand independently. This strategy maintained our focus while creating pathways for broader impact that honored our core principle of community empowerment rather than corporate control. As the team departed, I remained at the lake house for 1 additional day of reflection. The strategic direction we had chosen wasn't the growth trajectory most venture-backed companies would pursue. We had deliberately opted for impact depth over expansion breadth, for implementation quality over market domination. This choice felt aligned with my grandfather's approach to construction, building structures designed to last generations rather than maximize short-term returns. It also represented a distinct departure from the values my parents had consistently prioritized: visibility, recognition, conventional success metrics. The irony wasn't lost on me. The very qualities my family had dismissed as limitations, my focus on systems rather than spotlight, my preference for substantive impact over visible achievement, had become Electrogrid's greatest strengths. Our company's success stemmed precisely from the characteristics they had found problematic in their daughter. As I sat on the dock that evening, phone deliberately left inside to preserve the quietude, I received an unexpected visitor. Miguel's truck pulled up the driveway, and he walked down to join me at the water's edge. "Forgot my notebook," he explained, settling beside me on the weathered wooden planks. "But maybe that's not really why I came back." We sat in comfortable silence, watching darkness settle over the lake. Miguel had been with Electrogrid almost from the beginning, initially hired as a junior engineer, but quickly proving himself indispensable during our early implementations. "Been thinking about something you said during the retreat," he finally offered. "About how we're building something designed to outlast us. That's rare, you know? Most companies just want to get bigger, make more money, maybe sell to someone else eventually." "That path would be easier in some ways," I acknowledged. "Certainly more straightforward to explain to investors." "But not to the communities," he countered. "They'd know the difference immediately. They've seen too many projects arrive with grand promises and disappear when funding cycles end or attention shifts elsewhere." His observation articulated something fundamental about our strategic choice. We were deliberately prioritizing long-term impact over conventional growth metrics because the communities we served had experienced the failure of the alternative approach too many times. "The open framework idea is smart," Miguel continued. "Lets others build on what we've learned without us pretending to be experts in everything. Humble and ambitious at the same time." "Humble and ambitious," I repeated, appreciating the phrase. "I like that combination." As Miguel departed, leaving me alone with the night sounds of the lake, I reflected on how this strategic decision represented more than a business direction. It embodied a philosophy about technology's proper relationship with human communities, not as a solution imposed from outside, but as a capacity built from within. 2 weeks later, I presented our strategic direction to the full board of directors. The discussion was robust, with some members questioning whether we were being sufficiently aggressive in pursuing growth opportunities. However, the core strategy was ultimately approved, with the open implementation framework receiving particular enthusiasm from our more visionary directors. As the meeting concluded, James Hartford, our most commercially experienced board member, offered an unexpected perspective. I've guided dozens of companies through scaling decisions. Usually, I advocate for aggressive expansion when a company has validated technology and secured major funding. But Electrogrid is different. Your impact depends on implementation quality and community integration. Your strategy reflects that reality rather than applying generic growth formulas. That's rare and refreshing. His endorsement carried particular weight given his conventional business background. Even through a purely commercial lens, our community-centered strategy made sense given the nature of our innovation. The following day, I received an email from Eric Westfield, who had founded a renewable energy consulting practice after leaving Consolidated Power. Our occasional coffee meetings had evolved into a collegial relationship based on shared interest in transforming energy access models. "Heard through the grapevine about your strategic direction," he wrote, particularly intrigued by the open implementation framework concept. "My new practice is working with several international development organizations facing exactly the challenges your methodology addresses. Would value discussing potential collaboration once your framework is more developed." His interest confirmed the potential broader impact of our approach beyond our direct implementations. By developing and sharing our methodology rather than jealously guarding it as proprietary, we could influence infrastructure development globally without overextending our organizational capacity. That weekend, I found myself driving to my parents' home for a rare family dinner. After Electrogrid's success had made headlines, they had persisted in their efforts to reconcile, sending invitations I had mostly declined due to implementation demands. This time, with our strategic direction established and the DOE projects proceeding smoothly, I had accepted. As I turned onto their street, I realized I was approaching this dinner differently than previous family encounters. I wasn't seeking validation or recognition. I wasn't hoping for acknowledgement of past dismissals. I was simply visiting as the person I had become, someone comfortable with her choices and clear about her purpose. The strategic decision Electrogrid had made reflected this same confidence, pursuing a path aligned with our values rather than conventional expectations, not seeking external validation, but creating impact that spoke for itself. Whatever awaited, inside my parents' house, genuine connection or superficial reconciliation, I was approaching it from a position of inner clarity that no family dynamic could destabilize. Like Electrogrid itself, I had chosen depth over appearances, substantive impact over visible achievement. The path forward was defined not by others' expectations, but by alignment with deeper purpose. That knowledge brought a quiet confidence as I parked in the driveway, ready to engage with my family as equals, rather than as a daughter still seeking approval. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out, and don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.